If only it were real. You know, with the recent trends of companies wanting to remaster their older games and the constant amount of ports the Nintendo Switch has been getting as of late, I should have probably seen this title coming from a mile away. But can you blame me for thinking that after the many cliffhangers left by my favorite Xenoblade Chronicles X, that the guys at Monolith Soft would perhaps already be announcing a sequel of sorts to this underrated gem to finally answer the many questions it left us with in the first place? But that's not to say that when Nintendo showed us the original Xenoblade Chronicles beautifully ported to the Switch, using the engine from the recent Xenoblade Chronicles 2, with updated character models and a remastered soundtrack, that I lost my mind in the hype from seeing one of my favorite games ever being given so much love, and quickly became one of my most anticipated games for 2020. But with a sudden surge of remakes that has been going on as of late that mostly focus on older titles that rightfully deserve a fresh coat of paint to attract potential newcomers, why are there so many people excited for this release in particular, considering that it's not been so long since Xenoblade's port onto Nintendo 3DS? And the answer to that question, my friends, goes far beyond the simple excuse of some people being fans of the series. Because the strides that Xenoblade Chronicles did for the JRPG genre as a whole, particularly in the West, are far too big to be ignored, and it's one of the many reasons players consider it to be one of the best games of all time. For those of you who might not know, back in the days of the Nintendo Wii, a group of fans set out to make a petition under the name of Operation Rainfall, which hoped to see the release of 3 games in the West, those being Last Story by Miss Walker and AQ Interactive, Pandora's Tower by Gambarion, and lastly Xenoblade Chronicles by Monolith Soft, who came to somewhat fame thanks to their previous work on the Xenogears and Xenosaga series. Fortunately for these supporters, Nintendo did eventually release all 3 titles overseas, although under a limited amount of quantity, which made them rare and somewhat sought after games for the Wii's library, which only the most diehard of fans ever got the chance to experience. And while all 3 games did sell relatively well, Xenoblade Chronicles quickly overpassed the other 2 games and started to gain popularity over its JRPG peers, whose quality was somewhat declining and losing traction over on the West. While I don't really want to focus too much on this specific topic for this video, it's worth saying that Xenoblade low-key changed the state of JRPGs with its intriguing story, charming characters, and great execution when it came to its combat mechanics and gameplay that other companies quickly took notes from. For me, one of the main things that initially drew me towards the game was its simple yet mystifying setting to which we are introduced to during the game's opening cinematic.
Long ago, 2 great titans came into existence. The Bionis and the Mechonis. The titans were locked in a timeless battle. Until at last, only their lifeless corpses remained.
There's something magical about the idea of seeing civilizations grow on the bodies of these timeless titans that just captivated me, and being able to slowly climb their bodies during my journey, which introduced me to such beautiful and magical landscapes that filled my mind with wonders. But while I was innocently captivated by the scenery and gorgeous soundtrack, something rather ominous almost always loomed behind me. The sight of the foreboding Mechonis was almost always present in my travels, constantly reminding me of the enemy I had to eventually face, and in a way served as a benchmark for me to know how far my heroes have traveled to achieve their goals. Which is something the game does rather well in my opinion. It really wastes no time emphasizing who our protagonists are and what are the relationships between one another, to the point that we almost immediately feel like we know them as a person and what they may personally be striving to achieve. So when the main conflict starts, we have a clear understanding of what is the emotional drive behind our protagonists, why each individual in particular decides to join Shulk on his journey, and hopefully being able to uncover the secrets behind his mysterious weapon, the legendary Monado, along the way. This is one of the many mysteries lying around in the story that kept me coming back to play the game in hopes for an answer. Secrets such as what's so special about the phased Mechons? Why did the Bionis and the Mechonis clash in combat decades ago? And more importantly, what exactly is the Monado's true power? These are all questions the game beautifully weaves into its plot and uses as rewards for the players as they make progress through its campaign. But most importantly, the answers to all these questions are extremely satisfying game changers when it comes to the plot, that not only actually live up to the build-up they have been creating, but also change the perspective one might have towards the story as a whole. However, an interesting narrative is not enough to sell a game nowadays, because if your gameplay is not up to par, many players will quickly dismiss it entirely and move to something else instead. But fortunately, this is an area where, for my taste, Xenoblade Chronicles manages to achieve something rather special. The easiest way I think I can describe this game's main genre is by comparing it with an MMORPG, like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV, but it's instead an offline single-player experience. You have a vast open world to explore, filled with unique landscapes, special unique enemies, hidden treasures and vistas, and a real-time combat system that uses special skills that have cooldowns, which you have to manage and chain together in order to get the most amount of damage possible. But it's the main gimmick of the Monado granting Shulk a vision mid-fight that makes the battles feel more unique, and in a way ties what's happening in the combat with the story. When an enemy is about to unleash a powerful attack, the player will get a vision warning them of the impending doom, and forces them to act on the fly to change the outcome, which when completed feels extremely satisfying as you see your actions changing the near future. And as the story progresses and Shulk unlocks more of the Monado's powers, the player gets more options to change their outcome. And in this way, the game manages to reward the player with both more story and new combat options that keeps them wanting to come back and see what new wonders and abilities they might discover next. On top of this, you also start encountering new enemies that require specific conditions in order to be defeated, environments that force you to find an appropriate battle strategy around them, and more characters that join the party, bringing with them a unique ability to the combat that really keeps a sense of progression going as the game keeps evolving with your progress and avoids it from becoming stale after hours of play. Perhaps that is why I was hooked so much on this game when compared to others of the same genre. Where other games start becoming rather repetitive and you feel like you've mastered its mechanics during the first few hours of playing, Xenoblade keeps finding more and more ways to force you to change your strategies by promoting the use of the new tools that it gives you. And it's a great way to promote players from going outside their comfort zone and experiment with some new mechanics. And if exploring open worlds is a big reason to why you enjoy playing video games, then the many marvels found on Bionis will captivate your imagination, especially as you uncover more of its wildlife. And the best part of it is that the game often rewards you for going out of your way to do so. Finding new landscapes will serve you as fast travel locations. Uncovering new portions of the map will grant you with extra experience points, and discovering one of the many hidden locations will grant you with a beautiful vista and some rare items to boot. So if anything, there is plenty of reasons for you to explore the many sceneries found on top of the Bionis. And if anything, I think it's worth pointing out that some of the guys at Monolith Soft in fact lended a hand in creating the ever so popular Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, specifically in its massive open world, which they already had previous experience with. So let that be a testament to how expansive and impressive the world of Xenoblade Chronicles actually is, especially when you consider the hardware where it was originally released on. In hindsight, I might say that thanks to this game and its underrated sequel Xenoblade Chronicles X are part of the reason to why I quickly fell in love and became addicted to Final Fantasy XIV. So thank you Xenoblade for ruining my gaming life and my sleeping schedule as of late. So the question remains, should you consider getting a copy of Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition? Well, if you still haven't found a JRPG title for your Switch and any of the points I just mentioned remotely piqued your interest, then I think this game is more than worth of your time and will more than likely keep you entertained for hours on end. And if by any chance the game's spiritual sequel of sorts, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, didn't really attract your interest, then I still say it's worth giving this remake a shot, since the story and combat are drastically different, and maybe this game's more serious tone and deeper combat system might be engaging to you instead. There's also the fact that this game has some extra story content that takes place after the main campaign that adds even more value to the package as a whole, and that's not taking into account the obvious graphical improvements, changes to the menu interface, and the ability to switch between the original soundtrack and a completely new remastered version of it. If anything, this is probably the best way you can experience what is probably Nintendo's most recent groundbreaking series, and truly understand why perhaps Sakurai and his team deemed Shulk worthy to stand amongst the company's titans in their ever so popular celebratory fighting game. After all, a character being added to Smash Bros. Nowadays in a way speaks volumes for their game's legacy. The gist of things is that although Xenoblade Chronicles has been a rather popular game in recent years and was somewhat of a game-changer title for the industry as a whole, it has always sadly been a game not as accessible to a lot of players in the past. Its original Wii release was limited in numbers, its port on the 3DS was only compatible with the newest hardware that not everybody had, and its Wii U lifespan wasn't exactly at the center of the eShop's limelight. So I hope that with this new remaster on the ever so popular Nintendo Switch, that this monolith of a game finally gets the attention it so rightfully deserves, and hopefully fills more players with the intense emotions it left me the very first time I experienced its journey over the shoulders of the gigantic Bionis.